we all have to keep in mind as we craft these things.
Leah, thank you. If that's really Leah behind the Leah name.
No problem. I got it done for you. Sorry for the horrible backlight there, but yeah, no problem, guys. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. Really appreciate
Bye-bye.
it. Okay. Yeah, no, you're right, Jess. I mean, say a little more about, you know, that sense of connecting it to an action plan.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially like when we're expected through like the option of the doctoral project is to like embed yourself within an organization, and like we're basically coming up with recommendations before we've even kind of gone down that qualitative research path. I mean, and of course the recommendation could be, no, this isn't a good idea, but it's kind of one or the other, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it depends. Of course, it depends on your question, and there will be a lot of sort of things in between too. Sometimes that will surprise you. You know, the middle zone there that'll emerge to be bigger than you might think. The gray zone, but yeah, no, I think that's the challenge, is to sort of sort that out and come out with something. And you know, the way you frame your research question and how you structure these interviews is going to be crucial to allow you to do that. Let me pause though for a second. Is anybody either planning to not do a qualitative element to their dissertation or their publication stuff? I just want to be sure I'm not presuming too much. Is everybody planning to have a big chunk of this in their work? Sui, you too?
Yes, I think the qualitative is probably the most straightforward for, you know, given the time and setting that we have to complete this. I think if we were to do quantitative, it's a little bit harder, right, to get some of the data access and statistically to, you know, go through all of the data cleaning, et cetera, and coding. So I think we are, for the most part, all of us just doing different types of qualitative.
Right.
Like me, for example, I'm looking specifically at shared decision making within a case study setting. And so I plan on having semi-structured interviews. So I thought, you know, one of the readings was how to design and conduct the semi-structured, which was useful and interesting. I found, you know, the part on the protocol and what we need to consider, especially for, you know, designing the questions appropriately, thinking about like a clinical expert, all of that was very useful.
Okay, no, that's great. That's good to understand. Yeah, and even for those of you that have more of a quantitative background, like I think I shared with you, you know, was my situation before getting into this qualitative stuff, especially for, you know, changing organizations, designing better team models, anything that involves humans, it's very useful. Because humans don't usually respond as well to numbers as I once thought they would. More compelling evidence doesn't get it done. Yeah. So, okay. So, what other things that struck people or that you liked out of any of the readings that you came across?
That sounds really naughty. Really naughty. That's my disclaimer. I thought to myself, like to Jessica's point, how are we going to get these people to agree with us? I mean, how do you set the stage and maybe then ask your questions? Like,
Wait a minute. Hold on. This is very, very naughty. I wasn't sure. I was starting to feel anxious because we just started recording and I was like, oh my God, where's she going with this? But all right. Well, let's let's stay on that question then. I mean, who are you trying to convince? All right. What do you mean by that? Like, who's your audience for that purpose?
So mine is actually my research question. I had to tape it because I changed it and I now have a final one. So my research question is, how can transparency in the Medi-Cal grievance and appeals process administered by managed care plans improve health inequities and disparities for its Medi-Cal members? So mine is transparency. And currently, health plans called Medicare plans, they don't have to be transparent about the appeals and grievance process. And so, and that's really where I I personally and selfishly want transparency from these health plans to help these Medi-Cal members. And so I will be meeting with a few Medi-Cal plans that I know their appeals and grievance process. I mean, the division heads, and I'll be asking them some questions around that. And so I want transparency. So that's what I'm saying. How do you just kind of set the stage?
No, this is actually a really great question for any of you who, like Lorraine, are passionate about trying to get an end result. You have to really think this through. You have to be careful, okay? You have to divide yourself between the part of you that wants to see a certain result and the research part of you. Because, and here's what I recommend, and this is not like I'm not spinning or BSing, I'm telling you what's really worked for me. The researcher part has to say, well, look, if I want the other guy to be successful, the advocate who thinks the world would be better if ABC was true, then the researcher has to really do a good job illuminating the issues, the barriers, the obstacles, the possible solution. That researcher has to be superb if I'm going to really get to that result I'm hoping for. And that researcher has to be, even though you live with the other part, has to be as objective as you can be. So when you go into your research conduct with your interviews, you got to leave that other person aside and say, okay, now I understand that for this to work, I have to be really good at this. And if at the end of the day, after 3 or 4 interviews, I need to have a nice big cry because it seems so like completely hopeless because these people are clueless about it, you've learned something very important. You need to be able to take that honesty in and understand that, well, then maybe what you hoped and thought could be possible through steps 1, 2, and 3 is not even remotely possible. But then you have to reset. Then, you know, you go out and you have a few drinks with friends, you come back the next day, you say, all right, okay, researcher, now where do I probe? How do I refine my insights to get to something I can find that we can work with? And then what it should do is inform your researcher, okay, that initial construct to probe where I thought we had an opportunity to make a change in this regard is not getting me anywhere. What do I have to look at differently? Who do I have to interview that wasn't on my initial stakeholder list? And again, I'm talking very generally, you know, the constraints of time and your IRB approval and all that for your project may, you know, and just getting it done may limit you to where, okay, you might say, yeah, here's my theme. It's hopeless, you know, but I will pursue it this way after my DrPH ABC, as my action plan will be to take this other tack. Now, if you have time and you can think about the structure of your research to help keep you going down those new paths that your inner researcher will help you find, then keep going until you can get to something you can work with, that you can feed the other part of you that says, oh, now I got something I can really leverage and go after. I see a window of something that, you know, could be a hope to bring transparency more to reality here. But you really have to, and, you know, we'll talk about this more when we talk about, you know, the credibility and confirmability of research and all these things that, you know, you'll need to address in your research to make sure that that other part is not so biasing your efforts that you can get good answers, you get honest insights into what you have to deal with.
That was really helpful. So now I know I have one person on this shoulder and one person on this shoulder, right? It's like the devil and the angel or one of those. Yeah, that was really helpful. I appreciate that analogy.
Yeah, sure. Okay, what else? Who else was struck by anything or confused by anything or totally put off by something? Something had to hit you guys.
I thought the field guide I thought was really good. Just kind of the steps of conducting the interview, never really having done that before. I thought it was good, kind of just laid out like questions that are going to pop up and how do you handle it. Yeah,
thanks for, you know, reinforcing that, Adam. I you know, when you read it, you're sort of like, wow, this is pretty non-academic. Make sure you have extra batteries for your recorder and, you know, bring another pencil for your notebook. But it's really useful. I mean, before you guys start, because you go to all this trouble to line up these interviews. You try and make contact with these subjects, you schedule, you finally get the interview. Man, you do not want to like blow it because like the recorder's not working, or you're in an agitated state because you didn't have time to prepare your thoughts and reinforce how you're going to conduct your interview. I know it's kind of very basic, concrete, sort of like guidebook stuff, but that's what I found very helpful too. So I would skim over those checklists and stuff just to make sure, okay, I got the backup recorder, got the this, got the notepads. Give myself a little time to think through my interview guide before I start an interview. It's really very super practical, very basic, but really until you do a lot of them, it's a helpful kind of checklist. So that's good. I'm glad you found that useful.
I forget which reading it was, but the reminder about building rapport first before you get into your questions. At the same time, I was kind of surprised that it said asking for like name, title, like very basic kind of demographic information would be intimidating. So I found that to be strange.
Yeah, I mean, Leach describes that in the way she did it, for her stuff, because she didn't think her leading questions were that personally threatening or difficult, for the respondent to sort of get warmed up. She thought she mentioned that she leaves all those demographic stuff at the end. It really depends on your context. So I think the point she was making is if you lead with that sort of stuff, which I often do, by the way, it's like, it depends. Sometimes it's very easy to do that, very relaxed and just seems very natural. But I think the point she was trying to make is that some people may then think you're really trying to probe them, like they are the subject, not the phenomena or the experience or the issue you're trying to get at. It may, for people who are maybe a little paranoid or something, starting to probe the details of it. And so what kind of car do you drive? Where do you live? Who are your friends? Like you've got to be careful. Like, yeah, you can ask some basic stuff, but like you start to get a little too intrusive, people get freaked out. So, and depending on the context, it may not take that much intrusion for people to get skittish. They may almost want to be almost anonymous to you. And that's a whole nother way of approaching these kinds of research issues. So it all depends, but for most of the stuff that you'll do with most of the people, it's not a threatening thing. And I often start with, tell me about your role and your organization, and to kind of get a context of who they are and where they are. And I think she also talked about the grand tour question, right? About give me a sense of your typical day, or if you were pursuing this issue, what would your typical approach be? Those can be very helpful. You have to, all of these things can be useful, but you have to use them with some discrimination and put a few boundaries around there if people start going down rabbit holes, and redirect them a little bit. So, okay, what else? Anything else?
I have a question. It's kind of off topic, but so I was at a conference today, and it's coming to my attention that the topic that I'm interested in exploring, there are several now that I'm aware of, high profile organizations that have big money who are like really asking this same question. And I kind of find myself at this weird influx of like, I'm just some random academic hat outside of my US government capacity, who's now coming to these people who are actually like investing like 2 years of like pilot seed money and like kind of examining a similar issue that I want to talk about, and trying to come up with a way that I don't know, is like I'm doing this for an exercise outside of my day-to-day job because I need to for like this academic purpose. I don't know, I'm kind of like struggling with this strange phenomenon, and maybe I just have chosen the wrong topic, right? If I want to go explore these things for real, then I should go work at this organization that just got tons of money from WHO to examine this exact topic.
Well, so I don't know if this will be useful or not. Just, I mean, it could be what your sense of, that might be true. My little organization, what we always put a high premium on, because superficially it seems like everybody's pursuing, quote, similar or the same things or whatever. I think the thing to kind of noodle on is whether you think, based on your experience, your interest, your lit review, your conversation with people, whatever it is you have to draw on, is there a unique perspective that you bring to the effort? It's not about the size and the funding. It's about the quality of the thinking. It's about the, intensity of the interest. It's about your commitment to the topic. So, yeah, and I'm not presuming anything like that you feel comfortable answering that for yourself even, but I'm just saying, don't discount, the fact that you may have a unique perspective, notwithstanding that maybe you don't have, the years of experience or the $1 million of funding or whatever. It's much less relevant to this type of research than are you interested in trying to probe an aspect of this that maybe will continue to be under explored by others, or that you feel is uniquely important, that deserves extra attention. And again, I don't know the details of what you're looking at, but I would kind of take it from that vantage point. And if you reflect on that and you feel like, hey, yeah, I heard what these guys are doing and it's all pretty impressive and it's pretty broad in scope, but there's a couple of these things that I think would still be really interesting, cool, possibly important to do that I didn't hear much about, then do it and just keep going.
Yeah, I think that's true. And as soon as I hear about these ideas, I'm first to poke holes in them, right? Oh, well, no, you guys aren't thinking about this, or, of course my ego is going to be no, they've definitely missed something wrong. This idea is way better, right? So
but it's not always just ego. Sometimes it's true. You know what I mean?
right,
sometimes
right, yeah.
I mean, yeah, just I try to reflect on it from a couple different vantage points, and maybe talk to other people that know about the subject area and see what, bounce some of that off of them. But never ever, I'm saying this to all of you guys, never discount something that's an original idea you come upon that's from your perspective. Yeah, maybe when you do lit research, you'll see, oh my God, people had the exact same idea and probed it exactly the way I would. And okay, well, maybe it's not so original. But a lot of times it's true. You look for these things and you say, I don't really see anybody doing this exactly that way, or taking that perspective, or thinking it's as important as I do. And that's perfect. And just keep going.
Okay, that's helpful.
I just add one thing, Jessica, and maybe this isn't true at BARDA, but from my interaction with the WHO folks and Ministry of Health folks, is they tend to be very bureaucratically constrained. And when research is bureaucratically constrained, it always has huge gaps that I could imagine they're going to be like, oh my goodness, thank you for filling this hole that we know is needed, but we can't do that. It's not within the scope of whatever some random bureaucrat said was our research agenda.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I think the thing that I'm struggling with the most is that all of this is all happening at the same time, right? So in the same time frame that I'm supposed to be finished my work, big action plan, global action plans are going to be released, and big potential new entities could launch, right, that are supposed to be doing this work. My push is a little different, that we should be taking what's already existing and tailoring that to not have to create something brand new, right? So there's a new edge to that, but I guess it's just the timing of it that feels strange when I'm just one person who's doing it versus whole groups, whole working groups full of experts.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, what else? What do you guys think about that little, that's I guess it's a grad student or somebody that was in the midst of their thing, the Rabia Net. I thought that was just kind of interesting how she was going through the different phases of getting ready to do her research. Any of that resonate with you guys? I think she was talking about up to that point, that the crafting the interview protocol was the most time consuming. Um,
That was surprising to me that was the most time consuming part compared to like dealing with all the data afterwards.
well, she didn't, I don't know that she had really gotten that far,
Okay.
right? So she says, I believe, so around analyzing and summarizing the interview, I believe that this is the area in that I need more help. But she was, I think, forecasting her anticipation of that. She said she developed a plan to develop my skills, but I don't know that she had gotten quite that far. And then she says about reporting the findings, I'm not at this stage yet. So I think she was just starting to grapple with the real analyzing piece and realizing she needed help. So I think you're right, Paul. The jury isn't out that might not be the biggest time consuming thing. But you know, in the last course I had, and there was a typo in the assignment, just on the, I think at the top it said, this next draft of your research, your sort of practice research question and your practice semi-structured interview is worth 20 points, right? And then I saw that there was a little legacy typo at the bottom of that. I saw today, it said 15 points. And so it's 20 points. It used to be 15 points for last class. But then I realized I probably didn't do them any service by making it less value than some of the other things, because everything is going to flow from this, right? So the next phase of your trying out the interviews, having enough information that you can glean to then practice doing the coding and the analysis, you need to come up with a semi-structured interview that's going to be juicy enough and get enough data for you to work with. And a couple of students, got short on that. They put together kind of lean, semi-structured interview guides. I tried to give them some feedback to beef some of it up. Because what we'll do is you'll submit these. I'll give you feedback on each of them. You'll have a chance to revise them before you do your practice interview, right? So you'll use your revised version with your practice interview, and we'll talk about it in class together, and I'll give you personal feedback and suggestions. But it's a lot to think through, even if you pick some sort of not very deep, profound question as your practice research question, and that, by the way, could be anything. As long as it can generate a meaningful discussion about your subject's perceptions or experiences or viewpoints on whatever the topic is. And you want it to give you enough data that you can really work with it, so you ideally, a minimum 30 minutes, but more like 45 minutes worth of conversation is good. Could be up to an hour if you do probes and there's an interesting, exchange going on. I mean, pretty much you never go past an hour, even for your regular research. I mean, you can, if it flows and it keeps going and the respondent is really into it, there's no restriction, but you should typically plan to, especially if you schedule in advance, you tell somebody it's going to be a 45-minute to an hour interview, you really should make sure you don't have like 10 pages of questions that you expect to cram in there and then just expect them to override the time period. That's bad form. Creates a lot of resentment, and you also don't usually get the key things you need in time, within the conversation. So there's a lot to building these semi-structured interviews. There's a ton to think about, right? All the things that you read about in terms of building rapport, opening with, non-threatening questions, how you present yourself as an interested, active listener that values their input. The way you structure the questions as not being leading questions, and being clear. I mean, one of the things some of the students last time struggle with is, sometimes you might write a question where you're asking like two things at once. I don't know if you guys have ever had that. That's very that throws interviewees, subjects off tremendously. Like you could have a good sort of tempo going and all, and then you throw them with like two questions and if this, what about that, and besides, how about this, and they're like, it just breaks the pattern, right? So there's a whole bunch of things that you want to be really mindful of when you formulate the questions. And then I forget which reading it was, probably was the Leach one about the probes. The probes are huge, man. So there's probes you think about ahead of time. And then there's probes that you quickly realize when you do your first couple of interviews, like, oh man, I need to sort of anticipate going here more, because people make references, or use a term that I'm not quite sure I totally understand, and it needs to be, consistently sort of probed to be clarified and pursued a little more. So anyway, there's an art and a skill to developing these semi-structured interviews, and it takes, like everything like that, it takes practice. But the more you think about it, and what I did, especially in the beginning, I still do it sometimes now, is I will read out loud the questions myself. Like, so if I do a draft, I'll read them. I'll try to listen to myself and try and understand, does it make sense? If you have a victim at home, a friend or a family member who will help you sort of listen to you, that's always good, as well, because sometimes it's surprising how often, especially if you're close to a topic, you use certain terms or, avoid jargon. Even if you're talking to somebody who's expert, who you assume knows the term, be very careful about throwing in technical or jargon or industry specific acronyms or words. It better off to avoid it. The people who know that stuff will understand what you mean if you put it in plain language, and you can even say, just give it in plain language terms, and then say, so like, and then give your acronym if you want, if you think it's important to be that specific. But all of those kinds of things go into building these types of interviews. So what I'm looking for in the assignment is again, enough of a meaty question that you have to be clear and specific about what it is you're asking. Again, it can't be your actual research. It has to be, and when you introduce this to whoever you're going to eventually interview in the later, assignment, you need to say, I'm doing this for my class, and it will be shared with my fellow students and my instructor, just as you would disclose how you're going to use data from a research. We don't need IRB for this, because it's not research, it's training, it's teaching, it's education. So it's not about an ethical issue, but as part of good practice and good form and just respect for whoever you're going to talk to, even if it's a friend or a family person or a coworker, like you want to explain, like, I'm doing, this is a class assignment. I'm practicing how to learn how to do this skillfully for my dissertation or my research. And really appreciate you helping me with this. And here's the topic for this practice assignment I'd like to explore with you, and, get their verbal consent, and then just, go into it and explain how you'll share the information with classmates and your faculty. And then it won't go beyond this class, like, basically, and, typically, I mean, you don't, it's up to each of you, but you don't need to do anything that's going to be too, sensitive or anything like that. It could be quite, seemingly, I don't want to say trivial, but like, there's a lot of interesting questions around us that, you could have plenty of opportunity to explore. So let me pause there and see if there's questions about, like, that assignment or what we're trying to get at here with this.
I have a couple, so I'll take them in order, because I know we're not supposed to ask more than one question together at the same time. So the first one is, so like 60 minutes tops, that's probably not a lot of questions, right?
You'd be amazed how much you can get in 60 minutes.
Okay.
I mean, and I don't mean how many questions you can get in, I mean how much information you can get.
Right. But like, I probably shouldn't be planning, like, I'm never going to get to 20 questions, like 10
Probably
max
not.
is probably closer to.
It depends on how narrow or open your questions are, and you probably glean from the readings that, by and large, you want to offer more open than narrow.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you could do a survey. Do you like blue better than gray? Okay, I could give you a survey for that. I don't need to interview you. But, you know, how do colors change your mood? You know, that I need you to tell me something about. Give me some examples and why you think that's true for you. And does that connect to anything you experienced as a kid? Or, you know, that's where we're going with the interviews. So
Yeah.
you're right, Jess. You don't necessarily need a lot of questions, but it depends on the level of bandwidth you're going to allow. And the art there is, depending on how specific your research question is. You know, if your research question is too specific, you almost are forced to sort of ultimately, in the course of your interview, narrow them into answering that very specific question. Most of you probably won't have research questions that are that narrow. You'll be asking how or why, or, you know, could something else be true, or blah, blah, blah. And that gives you some wiggle room, which is a nice fit usually for this type of research.
Okay, so second question is, what do you think about having two different interview guides for two different like subpopulations? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, we do that all the time on my team, you know. So if you're interviewing the patient, or you're interviewing the provider, or you're interviewing a family member,
Right.
there's going to be different perspectives that you're going to want to understand from their vantage points. Perfectly fine. Yeah, to
Okay.
embed different sub questions for different subjects.
And this is the last one. For this exercise in this example, because we're interviewing, you know, people that we're like kind of comfortable with, but they won't have a level of technical knowledge around the questions. How does those two come together?
Well, you never want to ask, you want to, how should I think about it? So you want your research question, even if it's a practice one for class, to be something that your research subject can answer, can provide real information about, right? So I'm not sure what you mean. Like, if you don't want
Like, I can't ask my mom about, like, you know, global procurement strategies of novel products, right? Like,
I don't know your mom, but I'm
I
guessing
can't.
you wouldn't be able to have asked my mom.
I mean,
Yeah.
but like, okay, so they don't necessarily need to be the final set of questions, but like maybe asking like a coworker or someone like that is a better.
Well, but you know, you could do a different topic. Like it sounds like you're trying to do a topic related to your research. Is that what you're trying to do?
Well, I thought that made sense, but maybe not for this assignment.
Well, I appreciate the urge there, and a couple students did that last time, but it was a little bit tricky for them for the reasons you're describing, because
Right.
if you're going to ask the people who know that stuff, now you're getting like close to the research you're going to do for your research,
Right.
and that we should avoid.
Okay.
So if you want to ask related something to the people who have that technical knowledge, but you know, consider something totally different just for the practice of it, you know.
Okay.
Something that you think people that you can and will interview have a life experience of in some form, that they can provide their experience and insight back to you in the interview responses. And yeah, I mean,
Yeah, no, that's helpful. So that's like changing from like a very technical question that I would actually ask an interviewee and changing it to be like, you know, ask my neighbor, hey, what do you know about antibiotic resistance or superbugs, right? Like that's a very different.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, last time some of the students did stuff like, well, during the COVID pandemic, what was it like for you as a parent to get your kids on Zoom for school? Like, what did that cause in terms of the family dynamic and the disruption and all that kind of stuff? There's some really interesting interviews, right? So it could be close to sort of people's lived lives. It doesn't have to be, in this context, we're not talking about filling knowledge gaps in the research evidence. It's like, it's practice of how you approach people and frame questions for them in order to get good at developing those interviews.
Got it. That's super helpful. Thank you.
Sure. Anybody else with questions on that sort of thing? I mean, basically, if you think about and reflect on your readings and what the readings are guiding you to think about how to construct a good interview, that's all the rubric you need, like that, you know, whatever you have in the reading, and you say, oh yeah, I tried to apply, you know, and I don't mean like everything in the reading, like don't go crazy trying to say, oh, I don't know how am I going to show this example of what I read or that example, just the gist, you know, the important key things that struck you that it'll give you plenty to work on, believe me. That's sort of the guiding principle. What did anybody have any reactions to this Nyan Choka article? If you guys read that, the key stakeholders' perspective and experiences with defining, identifying, and displaying gaps in health research, a qualitative study protocol. This was pretty meta.
I was a little surprised at the expected number of interviews in each of her categories are pretty small if she wants to make comparisons, like especially the health policy, that like you're going to have enough grist there to make a comparison between what that health policy group says and the health practice group says, and you're talking about maybe 2 people. Seemed a little odd. But yeah, I was also curious, like why, like what's the purpose of publishing like a like before you've done it? Like I was wondering like why I cared until she had like done it.
Right. Well, I intentionally included, it was a bit of a curveball because most of the stuff I'll show you are going to be actual studies that do the thing. But the reason why I thought it was useful, and it may seem not as apparent now, but when you at the end of this course, you're going to be, the last assignment is for you to draw up like your research proposal, like a mini research. We're not like the, you know, the grant funding and the budgeting, but like the essence of like, what's the question? Which qualitative approach will you take? What data collection methods will you use? How will you assess validity, confirmability, you know, credibility of your analysis, right? Your analytic method, and then how you'll assess its credibility, right? So I'm giving you a primer with this because even though it seems boring to read as a protocol without any juicy results, this is basically a great framework for you to be able to use in that way. Okay, so it's foreshadowing all those aspects of how you would want to fill those boxes, and even you know, if you read their data analysis approach, and they talk about thematic analysis outlined by Braun and Clark. I love Braun and Clark, and I think it's going to be one of the most useful approaches you guys can use, not only for your dissertation and DrPH, but like forever. It's very flexible, but yet disciplined enough to really help you get meaningful answers. So some people will call it grounded theory light. You know, it's like you're not trying to build the theory, but you're trying to come up with some serious insights, you know, that wind up being called themes that really illuminate something and really provide a different vantage point, a different understanding, a level of understanding. So I find them to be one of that approach, that thematic analysis approach, which they were sort of the kind of the pioneers of it. I mean, when we read about it, we'll do some readings and we'll probably watch a video that they did at a conference. You'll be sort of like, well, this seems so straightforward and obvious, like, but prior to them really describing it and putting it out there, it wasn't really that clearly accepted as a pragmatic and academically accepted way to do this work. But it's so flexible and useful that I think for most of you, you'll find it really a useful approach. So a lot of things that are like peppered in here that you don't know yet are going to be the things that I'm like saying, you know, this is sort of, you can reference back to this when we get to those parts of the course and say, yeah, okay. And if you were to frame your final assignment similar to this, maybe not as exhaustively, you know, shorter and more concisely, you'll have it nailed, right? So that's why I picked this for you to have as a reference point now. But it is kind of meta. It's sort of like even the idea of doing qualitative research to find out what the gaps in research are is like already kind of meta. And then just to have this be a protocol for how we're going to explore the gaps in the research and not the actual pursuit of the study to find the gaps is like, whoa, like what the hell? But that was the purpose of it, was to help give you that framework of the elements of laying out a research strategy.
One thing that I really liked from that was in the title, that key stakeholders' perspectives. Like that's kind of what I think my research is. And I think this is why I'm having a hard time between like deciding if it's a dissertation, like a traditional dissertation, or this project route, because in order to get a true like diverse set of key stakeholder perspectives, assigning yourself to like one singular organization feels a little bit contrary to me for that. And maybe it's just that my topic is not fitting in that model. But I don't know if you have a lot of experience with this kind of like project idea. I know it's pretty new and hasn't been done, at least in this program previously.
No, I can't give you much guidance on that. I don't have too much experience with what's going on with the project side, Jess. But I mean, if you guys would share a little bit of your understanding of what that is, just so I can get a little better up to speed in terms of what you guys understand it to be. Give me a little flavor.
I think the idea is that all of the core components of like your understanding of the background, conducting the lit review, doing the qualitative studies, all of that is like the same. It's just in like what type of research question you want to ask and whether or not it is kind of more broad and theoretical versus applicable to a singular organization where you can like attach yourself and look very deeply into like a singular kind of organization or like county or something like that, right? And then the outputs are very different. So the output of the project is just like a publishable paper versus like the real dissertation. So I don't know if that like nuance of like attaching yourself to the organization, like I think if you're doing the project route, someone who's on your committee is supposed to be someone from that organization.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, am I missing anything, guys?
Jessica, you're the one that knows the most about this project. I'm like literally listening to you every time you talk about it because we don't really have a sample. I just feel like it's been conversations from Sue and I'm not as clear on it. So I really appreciate you reviewing it several times. Yeah. And even then I still have questions. So
yeah, I think just to like delve a little deeper into that, like the organizational element, I think it comes down to like, what is that change strategy we're recommending at the end? And for the project, that's like the meat of it. And so you have to have kind of something concrete to get to. So like on yours, Jessica, like I could imagine you could frame your whole question about like how the US government could and should be like leading this kind of an initiative in new global procurement mechanisms, or like why it won't, or those kind of questions. And then it's a project. Whereas if it's just like, what are the models out there and how should we think about these? Like, then that's like, I don't know what you, like, I don't know how you projectify that quite.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's the key difference. But then I think for us as public health professionals, at least for me, what I struggle with is I don't even know if ability is the right word, but like it being appropriate for me to attach myself to another organization that is not the US government when I am a US government, regardless of what hat I'm wearing, right? Like that's a real challenge for me. So that's hard.
Can't you do it at like, maybe it's not an interesting question to you, but like what role could BARDA play in catalyzing new global procurement mechanisms or something like that, and it's like your own thing, right?
Right. And that's like, yeah, you can do it. It's boring, but right. Like, I mean, I think you could, but yeah, and maybe that's the route I like have to go if there's like, it's almost like as if it's an apparent conflict of interest, right? Because there is this, I always come with, regardless of what hat I'm wearing, they still see me as, you know, you come with a whole purse full of money, and I want to tell you whatever you want me to say, regardless of what I actually think. So that's what I think kind of like attaching to a project route is difficult. Whereas keeping it at that higher theoretical level, it is more about that, like, I don't know, what's possible in the realm of possibilities.
There's a reason why mine's a process improvement project. So, you know, trying to stick with my org, and then I'm just going to improve something. So that's how I'm making it work on the project level.
Paul, you mentioned that on the dissertation, well, more that the project is really about the change management, but Sue also stresses that on the dissertation. And so that's why I have a hard time understanding the difference. It seems like even that is the same, that the only difference is really like, really, are you going to attach yourself to one organization? It's almost like, for me, one customer or a broader audience. It seems like that's the difference.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, right? And thinking about it that way. So like when I was talking about my topic with her, it's like, okay, the project route is like, how can Global Fund, one organization, take steps to expand their scope to enable X, Y, and Z, right? Like that, you can interview a whole bunch of stakeholders to understand how this organization, what steps they need to take, versus what is the best possible mechanism. Maybe it's not Global Fund, maybe it's Global Drug Facility, maybe it's something we've never even had before, right? Like, versus that more kind of existential question of what is the best.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you guys are helping me better understand this, so I'm still getting up to speed, so I don't have any profound wisdom, but you know, I will say that like the last class was interesting, you know, now with, you know, Jackson, Mississippi's water stuff, there were a number of students that were really interested in urban municipal water quality, you know, from Flint, and one of the students was looking at Newark, and you know, there's partly a question of like on the grand scale, what is going on with, you know, municipal water supplies that are aging in place and haven't been rehabbed, and now we're seeing example after example of this. And is there a broad, you know, is there a research approach to understanding what has happened, you know, and how to begin to address and remediate that, and you know, what led us to this? And then some students were like, no, I'm going after this municipality. Like this one student was like, I'm going after Newark, and I'm going to interview the Newark political people and the civil engineers there, and we're going to figure out what it was in Newark, you know. And whether Newark applied to Flint or Jackson was less of a significant issue than this is a major public health crisis in, you know, largely disadvantaged neighborhoods, and I'm going after that setting, you know. So I offer that only because I think there's like that gray middle zone, you know, and stuff, whether you're doing the dissertation or the project, that you can help define if you have, you know, particular interest or connections to a certain specific organization or context. You can, even if it's a dissertation, you can be more narrow in terms of the setting and context if you want to, while still doing the lit review on the question of, you know, why are municipal water supplies, you know, deteriorating in the way they have been, and then still focus on a given one. So I actually think you guys have a ton of flexibility. I don't think you should get too hung up on it. I think it's my sense and my own personal experience so far in having gone through this myself and then helping advise or be on dissertation committees is, you know, it's the quality of your thinking, it's the quality of what you've learned, trying to take what you're learning in the program to apply it, you know, in a solid way. And I think that's going to, you know, see you through well. And so anyway, I think you probably have some flexibility there. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just do a quick, I have a little slide decky thing here just to double check, go through a couple quick things here. You guys seeing this? No? Wait a second, I got to share. I got to hit the share button. Seeing it now? Okay. All right, so I don't know, these are little just cliff notes to myself about some. We've already talked about some of these, so we won't go. I just want to see if there's anything else here that prompts thinking. So the journalistic approach versus the qualitative researcher, or in Lorraine's case, the advocate versus the qualitative researcher, splitting yourself, and then gaining a rapport, making sure you are not just appearing to be an active listener, but really are active listening. And that's going to be key, because you'll miss the opportunity to probe things if you're not on your game. When you listen back to the verbatim tape and stuff, you're going to be like, oh shit, I should have asked, followed up on that, point that they raised that I kind of like was sleepy or whatever. So you want to be on your toes, really listening, not just sort of making people feel like you're listening, because you're going to need to be able to be interactive and probe when it comes up. The question order we talked about, warming people up, giving them easy things to start with. The non-leading, non-stigmatizing question around when did you stop beating your wife kind of thing. Grand tours we talked about, typical day in and on. Careful use of prompts, and this notion of if you're a talker, you have to know when to stop talking and let's start listening. So I've had students and my own colleagues, be a very wide range. Some people start really empathizing to people to the point of like, you never want to get to where you're sharing your experiences and empathy to people and you're taking up airtime telling them about you. Like, you've gone off the mark there, except in some exceptional circumstances, perhaps. But so the MAC Qualitative Research Field Guide, very straightforward, practical tips. It can be a reference guide for you, and you'll see as we do other things like the focus groups and stuff like that. It's the same kind of thing. It's just very pragmatic, how to get ready to do it, what to prepare, what materials to have, but it's very useful. The logistics, how to be an effective interviewer. Yeah, memorizing your interview guide, it's a very, very good suggestion, and to practice it, doing it. You really don't want to be reading it. Like, if you're halting reading your interview guide with people, it doesn't feel like a conversation. It doesn't flow nearly as well. So get familiar with your questions and how you want to phrase it, and the tone and the body language you want to have when you ask it, each of the questions. I mean, really think through all those little details and practice them. And once you do a couple, it'll start to really flow, and it'll be a very nice conversational exchange. And it's almost sort of like, if any of you are musicians, it's like once you learn a piece and you know it, you can play it much differently than if you're reading the notes all the time. Skills about rapport building. And again, I've had some students get overly carried away, like they want to sort of like lay on being chummy right off the bat. Like, you don't need to do that. You just need to sort of be, kind of low key and personable and put people at ease. And, if there's something that you might riff on a little bit, that's fine, but to build rapport, but you don't need to go too hog wild on that. Appreciating the participant's perspective, adapting to different personalities and emotional states. Now, depending on the kind of research you're doing and the emotional states your subjects may be in, that is very, very big. So when we did a project for a pharmaceutical company interviewing people with, refractory multiple myeloma who are not doing well in their clinical course and facing a lot of gnarly challenges and already suffered a lot of treatments, there's a lot of emotion there, and you really have to be ready. You have to give people a lot of space, a lot of time. You don't rush people when they're in certain states. So that may or may not be applicable to some of your research, but it's something to be really cued in on when it is important. Because the fact that they're brave enough and willing to sort of almost inflict their own trauma in telling you their story is an extreme form of giving of themselves to, trusting that you're going to try and do something helpful with their information on behalf of others. It's pretty intense. One question at a time, no leading questions, probes, and follow-ups. Forgot what case study samples mean. I don't know. I can't remember now what Mac was referring to with that. Did anybody help me? It's not ringing a bell, but I do remember interview steps in the checklist. Go ahead.
Yeah, I kind of remember that those were like the vignettes that you share with people,
Okay.
and then get their reactions to it.
Okay. Yeah, if you need to stimulate, get them unstuck and offering some things. Yeah, that's good, Paul. All right, so let's see here. What did I? Oh yeah. So what did we make of that paper? And then we talked about the assignment. Yeah. So I don't think there's anything else to talk about this one. I gave you the framework for that. So learning and practice. You can try out some ideas related to your PH if you wish. Some ideas. But this can be about anything, and you cannot start your actual research. Okay. My recommendation is pick a convenient topic that's interesting that you think your folks you're anticipating would be your subjects for the course practice work here could answer. And think ahead as you develop the semi-structured interview guide. Just remember you're going to be revising it and then conducting interviews with it in the upcoming assignments. It may sound simplistic, but many students, and including good students, sometimes have wrestle with, I have a research question and I'm going to ask a bunch of questions in the interview. How likely am I to get an answer to my research question from the responses to these often somewhat open-ended questions? That's a key thing to think about as you think about your questions. And again, it's not about trying to be too narrow in either the research question itself or the questions you ask. It's about just making sure that there's a really congruent alignment. And of course, even when you do a good job aligning those in ways that are likely to, provide data that's meaningful to ask the research question, any given respondent can of course go off a little bit, and you might need to find ways to articulate the question that you thought should elicit the response that's going to help you answer your research question. You might have tried thinking it through ahead of time, and you've written it a certain way in your semi-structured interview, only to find out when you ask it, it elicits a different kind of a response from people than you thought it would, that doesn't seem to be related as much to your research question as you thought it should be. So then you have to, on the fly, use probes or improvise questions to kind of get back to that. And that, again, is just a little bit of practice. But to the extent that you can think ahead about, like, okay, so if whoever I'm talking to heard this question, will they likely respond with something that's going to provide data that's going to help me answer the research question? It's sort of the way I would think about it as you're drafting your questions, right? Okay, and so step one, articulate the research question. Again, it should be a clear, answerable research question. Again, for the practice in the course, it could be, what was it like homeschooling kids during COVID? It could be, what do how does the, current craziness in our politics affect your family life or your hobbies or whatever? It could be, You know, a stage of life, you know, if you're interviewing people that might be approaching retirement, how do they perceive that life transition? And I mean, really, it could be quite anything, but it should be something that's clear and answerable. Okay, it doesn't. I don't care what the subject is, and I don't care. You know, I just care, is it clear and answerable? Have you thought about how to articulate that in that way? And do your questions that you're going to use as means to collect that data help people give you answers that will provide you the data to answer the question? That's really what this is, the practice that goes along with this. So here's some other crazy examples. How do family, friends, or colleagues feel about eating food from drive-through restaurants, visiting the dentist, Dr. Jim, auto mechanic, impact of COVID on life, current employment, job satisfaction? People will have a lot to say about all kinds of things like this if you engage them. You know, getting a little more specific, make sure you understand what they're saying and if they can offer you examples. And then kind of more of the how and the why is part of like the qualitative piece you want to get into. So it's not only like, you know, how do you feel about this? Why do you feel that way? You know, it just get, you know, be interested in how humans are reacting to stuff and try to probe the why side of this. This is the only type of research that will ever, you know, explore the why. And then with that in mind, you know, draft your interview guide. Again, try to follow the key points from the readings. It doesn't have to be every single detail of the readings, but, you know, the key things we've talked about today. And it should be supportive and assisting the respondent to answer you honestly in a way that will give you data that will help you answer the research question. So I'll post these slides too on Canvas, and then, you know, as a reference point, a little bit more about how to go about this. And again, I'm not nitpicky about the details on this stuff. If I get a sense that you're getting the key gist and the key important elements, I'm going to be delighted. And so it'll all be good. And along the way, if you have questions or you want to bounce anything off of me, I sometimes am caught up in a bunch of things, but email me. I think you guys should have my cell phone number. You could text me and say, hey, I emailed you, man, where are you? If I don't get back to you, okay, don't hesitate. I'd much rather, if you do have questions or you want to bounce anything off, even if it's just really informal, flexible, as a learning experience, I'd much rather you do that up front than you agonize and spend a lot of time and then submit something and say, oh, I hope that was sort of the right thing. Like, don't do that. Like, that's just silly. Just call me, or you know, you might have to poke me a little bit to get my attention, but I promise you I'll respond and we can chat and you can show me what you're doing. Okay, let's see, how are we doing? 6:54. Wow, man. I have to admit, this is the most on time I've ever been. I think Janelle set the tempo here. She set the standard. So, all right, thoughts, questions?
How many practice interviews are we doing? Is it 2?
2. And I'll tell you the way this is going to go. You're going to do one that's going to be recorded and transcribed verbatim. And you're going to do one that you're not recording and you're going to take notes. And everybody, when we've done this, walks away with a very clear experience of what the difference of doing that is. And that's sort of the point, a little mini exercise to get you guys comfortable with like why, like if you're serious about this work, you got to record and do the transcription. Like, I mean, not only the interview itself flows a lot better than you like taking note. Oh, hold on 1 minute, I have one more question, but like, you know, that whole the dynamic and flow. And just the you know, richness of the nuance of the information when you go to code it, it's like totally different. So we'll do it as an exercise. We'll do one verbatim and one with the notes, and just 2. I mean, this is just to give you a taste of the practice and then help you, anticipate what you'll do when you do your research. So you feel like you kind of have a sense of how you'll go about it.
And if we were interested in interviewing each other, is that okay?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, you guys seem like a pretty tight group. Got to be honest with each other though, so that's the only price of admission.
Are we submitting responses? Because I see online we only have to submit the draft.
Yeah, this assignment is just research question and the first draft of your semi-structured interview, the questions that you anticipate asking.
Okay.
With an intro that describes I'm doing this for class, it'll be shared with students and the faculty, ensure you ask for consent, express your thankfulness for their participation, helping you learn these techniques, just a little intro blurb that could be the same basically for all of you. I mean, if one of you wants to craft one and share it, I don't care, but you got to get the idea that intro thing is really important. I mean, it really is. And it was definitely when you do your research, like that intro thing is going to set a certain standard. People are going to know you're serious. It's professional. This has been, when you do your actual research, it's been IRB approved. You've been diligent in thinking about this. You're very mindful of their privacy, confidentiality. You articulate all that. It's a huge benefit. It immediately helps people feel like, okay, somebody who's really taking an effort, making an effort to make it comfortable, safe for me, and cares enough to go to all this trouble just for the opportunity to ask me stuff. So it's very helpful to go through it. I'm always very diligent, and that's one I usually will read, and I'll say to people, I'm going to read this introduction because it's very important that I cover each of these points with you. And I'll just say, this, and then, oh yeah, that's okay. That sounds really, thank you. You're a serious dude, man. So so that works out very well. So, practice of saying that a little bit in the context of this being a practice thing for the course, but as an intro, and then start to frame your questions. So Suvi, it's just the actual interview questions, and with that intro and the research question. I want to see how you you don't have to explain it narratively. You don't have to give me a description, but when I read it, I'm going to be asking myself, okay, if I was conducting this interview with these questions, do I anticipate I'd get the data I need to answer that research question?
Right.
And if not, how would I advise you to revise that's the way I'm going to give you feedback. I'm going to look at that and say, I'm not judging your research question. As long as it's clear and answerable, I don't really care what it is, but I will look at your questions and say, okay, based on my experience, what we've read and all that kind of stuff, do I think you would get the data you need based on that set of questions to answer that research question or not?
Okay.
All right.
So I was gonna do my questions, my interview questions on my research question because I wanted your guidance, but now I'm scared.
Well, for the reasons Jess said, it's kind of hard, right? Because you have to ask people that know stuff about it, and then that starts to get pretty close to your research. So it's kind of hard.
I have friends that I can ask that don't work for the companies I'm going to interview, and then have left. I have friends that I can ask.
You could do that if it's clear these aren't going to be people you're going to interview for your research, and you think you want to do that, Lorraine. You can do that. Just be really upfront with them about this is for your class, and it'll be shared with your fellow students and the faculty, but you can do that. That's okay.
And the interviews are good. So it's two different people that you would interview. One, two people. Okay.
Yeah.
Counting the friends. That's all. Okay.
Yeah.
One might say, I want to do it. And then there's another one. So I have to think about the circle of friends. That's all. Okay.
Yeah, everybody should use your circle of friends wisely. You never know when you're going to need them for different things. So All right, great. Well, if you have any questions along the way during the week, give me a shout out, and I'll try to be available to everybody. Okay. All right. Thanks, guys. Have a good
Thank
week.
you.
Ciao.
You too.
I'm gonna stop the recording and I will send it to the class. So
Okay. Thanks
Adam,
so
you're the
much.
official cohort leader for knowing that it's going to be sent to the class.
Okay.
Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks. Have a great day, guys. Bye.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.